Ancient Egypt was never meant to be understood through textbooks and tourist guides. It was a code, a sacred blueprint for the evolution of the soul, hidden in plain sight. You were taught it was all tombs, slaves, and superstition. But what if the truth was deliberately buried? What if those temples weren't monuments to the dead, but living technologies for awakening the divine within? You were shown kings and queens, but never told they were initiates. You were shown pyramids, but never told they were portals. You were shown gods, but never told they were mirrors of your own consciousness. What if the real story of Egypt was never about history, but about remembering who and what we truly are? This isn't just another ancient mystery. This is a forgotten roadmap to immortality encoded in stone, myth, and ritual. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. It's a gateway to understanding the universe and your place within it. When you think of a pharaoh, you probably picture a crown, a throne, and a civilization built on power. But power in ancient Egypt didn't come from armies or wealth. It came from inner mastery. The pharaoh wasn't just a ruler. He was an initiate, a spiritual alchemist, a living symbol of the union between the divine and the human. Every coronation was a rite, a symbolic rebirth into a higher state of being. Every symbol on his regalia encoded with metaphysical truths. His rule wasn't political, it was vibrational. The real throne was consciousness. The Egyptians didn't separate science, art, and spirituality. They saw them as different languages describing the same truth. And so, their leaders weren't trained in policy. They were trained in the sacred sciences. Years of initiation prepared them to become walking temples, transmitters of cosmic law. The crook and flail weren't just symbols of kingship. They represented control over the inner self, compassion and discipline, heart and will. To wear the double crown wasn't just to rule both Upper and Lower Egypt. It was to unify the duality within, the masculine and the feminine, the spiritual and the material, the seen and the unseen. They were masters of internal integration. Temples weren't places of worship. They were transformation chambers designed with mathematical precision and built in resonance with the stars. They mirrored the architecture of the human soul. You didn't go to a temple to pray. You went there to remember. Step by step, chamber by chamber, the initiate walked through layers of symbolic death and rebirth. These weren't metaphors, these were processes encoded in space, vibration, and geometry to rewire your consciousness, to activate something sleeping within. Each chamber held a specific frequency, designed to resonate with different aspects of the initiate's being. This is the knowledge that never made it into modern classrooms. Because if people knew that spiritual mastery was the true purpose of life, the systems of control we live under today would collapse. If people understood that the pharaoh wasn't a god because he was born into power, but because he earned it through inner transmutation, they'd stop looking for salvation in titles, money, or followers. They'd begin looking inward. And that's why this story was buried. Because the pharaoh's greatest secret wasn't how to rule others, it was how to rule oneself. It was about self-governance and spiritual sovereignty. What we share here is just the beginning. Some knowledge is too sensitive, too targeted, too suppressed to speak freely about on platforms like YouTube. If you want access to what can't be shared here, sign up for our free Insights Academy newsletter at the link in the description. You'll also receive a free copy of the Kabbalion, but only for a limited time. This is your opportunity to delve deeper into these esoteric teachings. Back in ancient times, not everyone was allowed into the deeper chambers. You had to prove your readiness. You had to be willing to confront illusion, to dissolve your ego, to die symbolically before you could truly live. The spiritual science behind the Egyptian priesthood wasn't philosophy, it was technology. Initiates weren't memorizing doctrine, they were embodying frequency. They knew how to harness energy, focus intent, and align with cosmic law. They worked with vibration the way modern minds work with electricity. But this knowledge was never meant to be exclusive. It was only hidden because it had to be protected, misused. It could enslave rather than liberate. And so only those who were ready, truly ready, were shown the path. Only those with a pure heart and a strong will could handle such power. But now we're living in an age of remembering. The veils are thinning. The temples may be ruins, but their secrets still breathe through their geometry. Their vibrations still echo in those who listen. You don't need to stand in Carrick to enter the initiation. You just need to remember who you are and why you came here. Because Egypt was never just a place, it was a consciousness. And consciousness cannot be conquered. It can only be forgotten or remembered. It's a state of being accessible to all. The Egyptians saw the soul not as one unified entity, but as a sacred composition of forces. You weren't just a spirit in a body. You were a multidimensional being fragmented across realms, with each part holding its own intelligence and purpose. Among these aspects, two stood out: the Ka and the Ba. These weren't abstract metaphors. They were central to how the Egyptians understood consciousness, death, and spiritual evolution. The Ka was your life force, your vital energy, the spark that entered you at birth and sustained your physical form. The Ba was your essence, your personality, your spirit that could move between realms, especially in dreams, visions, and after death. The Ka belonged to the earth. It was fed through food, breath, ritual, and sacred living. The Ba, on the other hand, was winged. It could leave the body and travel, witnessing other dimensions, gathering wisdom. When you died, your Ka and Ba didn't just vanish. They separated, journeyed, and reunited, only if the proper rituals had been performed. Rituals that mirrored a spiritual science of balance, purification, and awareness. In other words, your soul had to pass tests, not because judgment was being imposed, but because frequency cannot lie. You couldn't fake purity. You couldn't disguise the heaviness of your heart. The cosmos knew your vibration and responded accordingly. The underworld was never a fiery hell. It was a symbolic terrain, a mirror of your own subconscious. The gods who appeared as judges or guides were archetypes within your psyche. Anubis didn't threaten you. He revealed you. Thoth didn't scold. You either resonated with truth or you didn't. And when your heart was placed on the scales against the feather of Ma'at, truth, balance, harmony, there was no courtroom drama, just a frequency check. Either your soul was aligned or it wasn't. And if it wasn't, you weren't punished. You simply weren't ready to ascend. Consciousness cannot be forced into evolution. This was a personalized journey of self-discovery. In the modern world, we reduce death to biology, a final blackout, a cold end. But the Egyptians saw death as a second birth, not a closing door, but a passage, a transition into a different form of awareness. They spent their lives preparing for it, not in fear, but in reverence. The true spiritual path wasn't about collecting beliefs. It was about lightening the soul, about shedding attachments, illusions, false identities, and all the weight that would tip the scales. The goal wasn't to escape judgment, it was to become so in tune with divine order that judgment was no longer necessary. It was about aligning with the inherent goodness of the universe. This wasn't mythology. This was consciousness science encoded in symbols, rituals, and texts modern minds often dismiss as fantasy. But ask yourself, how did they build monuments aligned perfectly with celestial movements? How did they know how to preserve the body for thousands of years? How did they encode psychological truths still being uncovered by modern therapists and mystics today? Maybe the question isn't, were they advanced? Maybe the question is, why were we taught to forget? Why was this profound wisdom erased from our collective memory? Every ritual, every offering, every line in the Book of the Dead was part of a system to guide the soul through realms beyond the physical. This wasn't religion as we know it. It was a user's manual for the soul. It was about navigating transformation, not worshiping deities. The deities were the symbols, the rituals were the technology, and the human being, you, was the vessel of divine potential waiting to be activated. You were the key to unlocking your own spiritual potential. The journey of the Ka and Ba reminds us that we are not linear beings. We don't begin and end. We shift, we evolve, we fragment and reunite. And most importantly, we're never really separate from the divine. We just forget that we are living temples with doors into other realms already built into our design. This realization is the foundation of true enlightenment. You've been taught that the pyramids were tombs, silent graves for long-dead kings, but that's not what they were, not even close. The truth is far more electrifying and far more threatening to the narrative you've been fed. The pyramids weren't built to bury the dead, they were built to awaken the living. These weren't monuments to power, they were machines of consciousness, engines of transformation encoded with sacred geometry and cosmic intelligence. They weren't built for status, they were built to alter frequency. They were designed to resonate with the earth and the cosmos. Everything in Egyptian architecture had purpose. Every angle, every stone, every corridor was a calculated expression of harmony between the heavens and the earth. The Great Pyramid at Giza isn't just aligned with the cardinal directions, it's aligned with the stars of Orion's belt, the constellation associated with Osiris, the god of death and resurrection. Why? Because the pyramid wasn't just meant to house the body, it was meant to guide the soul. It was a map, a mirror, a portal. The structure itself resonates with the Earth's natural frequencies. The inner chambers and passages create vibrational effects, acoustic and electromagnetic, meant to activate specific states of awareness. This wasn't decorative architecture, this was spiritual engineering. It was a deliberate manipulation of energy and consciousness. Standing inside these spaces wasn't meant to impress you. It was meant to change you, to strip away the false layers of identity and recalibrate you to something higher. And the stone used, limestone, granite, wasn't random. These are piezoelectric materials capable of storing and transmitting energy when under pressure. The ancients knew this. They weren't stacking rocks. They were building a vibrational field. They were creating a resonant chamber for spiritual transformation. Modern architects build to contain. The Egyptians built to liberate. They understood that space shapes mind, that the geometry of a place can either numb the spirit or awaken it, that symmetry, proportion, and alignment are not just aesthetic, they are energetic. And nowhere is this more evident than in the temples. The deliberate design amplified specific energies. Walk into Luxor or Karnak and you'll notice the repeating columns, the progression from outer courtyards to inner sanctums. That's not just layout, it's initiation. It mimics the journey inward from the noise of the world into the silence of the soul. You weren't supposed to just admire the temple. You were supposed to become the temple. You were supposed to move through it like a ritual, shedding your lower self at each threshold until you stood face to face with the divine within you. This is the essence of Egyptian spirituality. Transformation through environment, consciousness through architecture, divinity through design. And they achieved it not with digital blueprints, but with cosmic wisdom passed down from a civilization even older than Egypt itself. This suggests a legacy of knowledge stretching back to the dawn of humanity. How else do you explain their precision? How else do you explain that the Great Pyramid's base is nearly perfectly level, off by less than a centimeter without modern tools? Or that it's positioned at the very center of the Earth's landmass? These are not coincidences. They are signatures of a knowledge we've forgotten, or more accurately, been made to forget. A knowledge that understood how to work with energy, not against it, that saw the human being not as a consumer, but as a vessel for cosmic intelligence, a temple in motion. It's a testament to their profound understanding of the universe. The architecture of Egypt wasn't built to last. It was built to transmit. It wasn't just meant to preserve the past, but to encode a message for the future, for us. Because when you walk through those ancient halls, something stirs, something activates. You feel it. You don't know how you know, but you know. That's the architecture doing its job. It's waking you up, it's whispering, you've been here before and you're here now to remember. The echoes of eternity resonate within those stones. You've probably heard of the Book of the Dead. It sounds ominous, even morbid, like a relic from a culture obsessed with death. But that title isn't even accurate. The Egyptians never called it that. Its real name was the Book of Coming Forth by Day. And that changes everything because it wasn't a book about dying. It was a book about awakening, about what happens when the illusions fall away, about how to rise not just from the body, but from the blindness of unconscious living. It's a guide to navigating the realms of consciousness. This wasn't a set of religious commandments. It was a guide for the soul, a map through the unseen realms encoded with myth, symbol, and cosmic psychology. Every spell, every line, every instruction was designed to teach the soul how to navigate the afterlife. But more than that, it taught the living how to live with the awareness that we are more than flesh, more than thought, more than personality. It emphasized the importance of living a conscious and purposeful life. The Egyptians saw death not as an end, but as a doorway. And they understood that how you lived determined how you moved through that doorway. The soul in their eyes was not judged by some external deity. It was weighed against the truth itself. That's what Ma'at represents. Not a goddess in the traditional sense, but the force of universal balance. The feather was light because truth is light. The heart, however, could be heavy with regret, deception, fear. You weren't punished for these things, but they anchored you. They kept your ba from rising, your ka from reuniting with your higher self. So the book didn't teach fear of judgment. It taught how to live a life in resonance with your soul's true nature. It offered a path to spiritual liberation. In these pages, you find spells to ward off chaos, affirmations to speak your truth, instructions on how to recognize divine beings, and codes that help the soul pass through symbolic gates. But these weren't fantasy. They were archetypes, layers of consciousness. Each gate you passed was an aspect of your own shadow, your own limitation, your own unintegrated pain. The demons were the lower vibrations you hadn't yet alchemized. The names were symbolic keys, frequencies of vibration. To speak them was to command presence. To remember yourself as more than a fragmented being stumbling through darkness. To remember you were light. This inner journey was a process of self-integration and shadow work. There's a reason this knowledge was hidden under sand and mistranslated for centuries. Because if humanity realized that death is a transition and not a termination, entire systems of control would unravel. Fear loses its grip. Guilt loses its power. Control mechanisms break when people stop being afraid to die and start being committed to living fully, consciously, in alignment with their true self. It challenges the very foundations of societal control. The Book of Coming Forth by Day wasn't reserved for priests or scholars. It was for anyone who sought liberation. It was copied, buried, painted on tomb walls, whispered in rituals, not to preserve history, but to activate memory. Because the soul doesn't need to learn. The soul remembers. It remembers how to walk through the valley of death and emerge in the light. It remembers the sound of Ma'at's voice. It remembers that there is no finality, only change. It emphasized the inherent wisdom and resilience of the soul. And maybe that's the truth the modern world has worked hardest to suppress. That death is not the enemy. That the end isn't real. That the soul is never extinguished, only transformed. Because once you realize that, you stop living like a machine and start living like a flame, illuminating, moving, reaching. The Egyptians didn't fear death. They studied it, danced with it, understood it. Not because they were morbid, but because they knew the secret that death, when understood, teaches you how to live. It revealed the impermanence of life and the importance of living fully. In today's world, ritual has become hollow, reduced to tradition, performance, or superstition. But to the ancient Egyptians, ritual was not about worship. It was about remembrance. Every act, every chant, every step within a temple was part of a precise technology designed to initiate a transformation in consciousness. These weren't empty ceremonies. They were sequences engineered to awaken. And those who walked the path of the initiate were not chasing dogma. They were seeking direct contact with the divine within themselves. It was a pathway to personal transformation and spiritual awakening. To become an initiate was not a title. It was a process, a descent into the self, a symbolic death of all that was false. You didn't enter the priesthood by inheritance or popularity. You entered through trial. You were broken open, stripped of illusion, tested across multiple planes, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And each test wasn't designed to see if you could memorize truths. It was to see if you could embody them. Initiation was the core of Egyptian spirituality. It was how knowledge was transmitted, not by books, but by experience. You had to live the mystery to understand it. Walk the temple halls, stand in sacred geometries, chant syllables that open parts of the brain and heart most modern humans don't even know exist. There were rituals for cleansing the body, opening the third eye, aligning the breath with the stars. None of it was superstition. It was precise, calculated, a science of the soul. It was a holistic approach to spiritual development. Every initiate passed through a symbolic death. Often this involved literal time spent in the darkness of the inner chambers of pyramids or tomb-like sanctuaries. Days in complete silence alone, nothing but your thoughts, your fears, your subconscious rising to the surface like smoke until there was nothing left to run from, until the illusions cracked and your real self began to emerge, not the identity given by society, but the eternal spark that always existed beneath it. It was a process of confronting one's deepest fears and limitations. And here's what most people don't realize. The physical pyramid wasn't the only pyramid. There was another one hidden in plain sight within you. The structure of the temple mirrored the layers of consciousness in the human being. Outer courts represented the body and senses. Inner chambers represented the heart and mind. The holiest inner sanctum, what they called the Holy of Holies, represented the divine spark at your core. Reaching it wasn't about going deeper into stone, it was about going deeper into yourself. It was about accessing your own inner sanctuary. The rituals of initiation weren't created for spectacle. They were designed to activate this inner temple, to open the floodgates of intuition, to align you with cosmic laws that still govern the universe today. Once you were attuned to them, you didn't just know truth, you became it, you radiated it. And that's why this path was so guarded. Not because it was elitist, but because it was powerful, dangerous in the wrong hands, sacred in the right ones. It required a deep sense of responsibility and ethical awareness. Much of what was taught in these initiations now echoes in other traditions. Kundalini awakening, chakra alignment, alchemical transformation. The language has changed. The symbols have shifted, but the essence is the same. Transcend the ego, purify the vessel, awaken the divine. The Egyptian initiates were masters of this, and they left clues for us, not just in stone, but in vibration, myth, metaphor, clues that whisper across time for those willing to listen. It highlights the universal nature of spiritual principles. And maybe that's why you're here. Maybe you're not just curious. Maybe something ancient is stirring in you. Maybe your soul has done this before, walked this path, faced this death, and now, in a world built to distract and numb, you're ready to step into ritual, not as performance, but as remembrance. Not to believe something new, but to remember something eternal. You don't need a temple, you are the temple. The pyramid is within you, and the initiation, it's already begun. It's a call to embrace your own inner potential and embark on a journey of self-discovery. You were taught to see the gods of Egypt as myth, as ancient superstition, as relics from a time before reason, but you were never meant to worship them. You were meant to remember them because they were never just gods. They were blueprints, mirrors, symbols of what already lives within you. Every story in Egyptian mythology wasn't meant to entertain. It was meant to awaken. These gods weren't floating in the sky waiting for praise. They were embedded in consciousness, encoded in your psyche, whispering ancient truths beneath the noise of your modern identity. They were archetypal representations of human potential. Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe, wasn't just a god of writing. He was divine intelligence itself, the force of inner knowing, the keeper of sacred memory, the one who stood beside the scales as your heart was weighed, not to judge you, but to remind you in every moment of doubt. When your intuition whispers something the world tries to drown out, that's Thoth. When you're drawn to sacred knowledge, when you hunger for truth no one taught you, that's Thoth remembering himself through you. He embodied wisdom, knowledge, and the pursuit of truth. Isis, the divine feminine, was never just a goddess of motherhood or magic. She was the embodiment of transformation, the principle of resurrection, not just of Osiris, but of you. Every time you rise from heartbreak, from failure, from forgetting who you are, her power wasn't in spells. It was in presence, in unconditional love that mends what has been torn apart, in the alchemy of feeling. She is the voice within you that won't let you stay broken, that gathers your shattered pieces and whispers, "Rise." She represented healing, compassion, and the power of the feminine spirit. And then there's Osiris, the god who was dismembered, cut into pieces by his brother, scattered across the land, and brought back to life by love. His story is not a legend, it's a parable of spiritual death and rebirth. Osiris is you. When the world tears you apart, when your identity fractures, when the life you built crumbles, and Isis, that divine force within, comes to piece you back together, not as you were, but as something greater, the resurrected self, whole because of the breaking, powerful because of the descent. This is the triad of transformation: wisdom, love, rebirth. Thoth, Isis, Osiris. They're not outside of you, they are you. They live in your breath, your struggle, your healing. They represent the potential for growth and transformation inherent in every human being. The temples told these stories not to scare or mystify, but to guide, because they knew that every soul would forget. Every soul would be broken, and every soul would need a path home. Even the symbols themselves carry layers of meaning. The Eye of Horus, often mistaken for superstition, is a map of the brain's pineal gland, the seat of higher perception. The Ankh, often called a cross with a handle, represents eternal life, the union of opposites, masculine and feminine, heaven and earth. These weren't decorations, they were frequency-based visual codes, keys. They weren't designed to be worn as fashion, they were designed to unlock you. They were designed to activate your inner potential. The myths are more alive than ever, not because they still echo in temples, but because they still echo in you. Every time you seek truth despite confusion, that's Thoth. Every time you gather your strength after devastation, that's Isis. Every time you step into a new version of yourself, born from loss and fire, that's Osiris rising. In a world that strips life of meaning, the ancient Egyptian gods remind you that you are meaning incarnate, that every moment of your life, your losses, your wisdom, your healing is part of something sacred. The gods never left. They were never external. They've just been waiting for you to stop looking up and start looking in. They are reflections of your own inner potential waiting to be awakened. Science and spirituality were never meant to be enemies. Not in Egypt, not in the beginning. The ancient Egyptians didn't divide the world into physical and metaphysical. They saw them as one continuum, different frequencies of the same reality. And at the heart of that reality was the soul, not as a poetic idea, but as a measurable, observable phenomenon made of energy, vibration, resonance. In other words, a science, a lost science, one that was never lost through accident but through design. It represented a holistic worldview that integrated all aspects of existence. You've been taught that Egypt was a civilization of superstition, advanced in architecture but primitive in belief. That's a comfortable lie, because the truth is they were operating on a level we're only beginning to rediscover. Quantum physics speaks of non-locality, entanglement, and multidimensionality. The Egyptians lived that reality. They didn't need machines to map consciousness. Their temples, their rituals, their symbols were machines, organic technologies crafted to interface with the divine, to raise human awareness into direct communion with higher realms. They knew that sound could open the heart, that light could heal the body, that breath, when focused, could shift awareness across dimensions. They encoded the structure of the atom in their art, the mechanics of energy in their myths. They understood the electromagnetic nature of thought, the effect of intention on matter. The Hekau, sacred words, weren't just chants. They were frequencies, sonic blueprints spoken with intention. They didn't just describe reality, they shaped it. They understood the power of vibration and intention. The priest-scientists of ancient Egypt weren't academics. They were initiates of a living science. They studied cycles of the stars, of the body, of the soul. They understood the law of correspondence, as above, so below. Not just metaphorically, but energetically. The motion of the heavens mirrored the patterns of the human energy field. The movement of the planets influenced consciousness, not through superstition, but through harmonic resonance. This wasn't mysticism as escapism. It was engagement with reality at its deepest level. It was about understanding the interconnectedness of all things. The Egyptians mapped how the soul journeys through layers of being, from the physical to the astral to the causal, each one with its own laws, its own energies, its own purpose. And they saw the human being not as a fallen creature, but as a divine instrument capable of awakening to cosmic memory. The temple wasn't a sanctuary. It was a laboratory of consciousness. Their science wasn't written in equations. It was written in stone, in symbols, in ceremonies, in the proportions of temple walls and the cycles of ritual. They didn't dissect life to understand it. They lived it, observed it, aligned with it. They didn't conquer nature, they harmonized with it. And in that harmony, they found something modern science has yet to grasp. That the universe isn't dead matter, it's alive, it's conscious, and it responds to intention, awareness, and frequency. This emphasized the importance of living in harmony with the natural world. We're told that ancient knowledge is outdated, irrelevant in an age of data and algorithms. But how can it be irrelevant when it's still functioning? The pyramid at Giza still resonates. The Ankh still pulses with meaning. The stories still trigger awakenings in those who dare to read them symbolically instead of literally. Maybe it's not outdated. Maybe we are disconnected from nature, from spirit, from our own inner technologies. It's a challenge to reconsider our assumptions about progress and knowledge. The Egyptian worldview wasn't primitive, it was holistic. It was based on unity, on balance, on the soul's capacity to evolve. And that's what makes it threatening. Because in a world built on division and distraction, a science that reminds people of their wholeness, their sovereignty, their ability to access divine intelligence without intermediaries, that's dangerous, that's revolutionary. It encourages individuals to reclaim their power and autonomy. This is why the temples were sealed, the scrolls hidden, the meanings distorted. Because a population in tune with this knowledge cannot be controlled. You don't need to be told what's real. You can feel it. You don't need to fear death. You understand it. You don't need to chase validation. You already know who you are. That is the power of this lost science. And it's not lost because it disappeared. It's lost because it was buried under sand, under lies, under the noise of a world afraid of its own soul. It highlighted the deliberate suppression of ancient wisdom. But the soul doesn't forget, and neither do you. If this knowledge feels new to you, it's not because it was never there. It's because someone made sure you'd never find it. For centuries, the deeper truths of Egypt have been distorted, silenced, and buried, literally and figuratively. Tombs sealed, scrolls stolen, symbols rebranded. You were given stories of gods and gold, slaves and superstition, but not once were you told that this civilization held the keys to human consciousness. Not once were you told that their rituals weren't religion, they were reality. Not once were you told that this knowledge was hidden for a reason. Because if you knew, you'd start asking questions the system doesn't want you to ask. It exposed the manipulation and distortion of history. Colonialism didn't just loot the artifacts, it hijacked the narrative. Museums filled with sacred tools now sit behind glass, robbed of context, treated like curiosities. But they weren't decorations. They were instruments, frequencies, technologies of mind and spirit. And as they were removed from their homeland, the teachings behind them were rewritten, mistranslated, ridiculed. Egypt was reduced to a spectacle, a land of riddles and mummies and mysteries, not a civilization of initiates and alchemists who mapped the human soul with more accuracy than modern psychology dares to dream. And why? Because systems of power survive on disconnection. Because when people forget who they are, they become easier to mold. Because remembering the truth of your nature, your soul's endurance, your inner divinity, your capacity to evolve makes you immune to manipulation. You don't consume out of emptiness. You don't obey out of fear. You don't follow out of habit. And that's a problem for them. It highlighted the deliberate attempt to disconnect people from their spiritual heritage. The suppression wasn't accidental, it was methodical. Religious institutions replaced inner initiation with outer obedience. Academic institutions reduced sacred symbols to superstition. Entertainment flooded your senses with noise to drown out the quiet voice of memory. Even history itself was weaponized, sanitized, simplified, stripped of its soul. You were trained to forget and told that remembering was dangerous, heretical, delusional. And in that forgetting, a civilization like Egypt became a myth. And you became a stranger to your own divine design. It revealed the systematic dismantling of ancient wisdom and its replacement with control mechanisms. But here's the irony. They never destroyed the knowledge. They couldn't, so instead they hid it in plain sight. The stories remained, just coded. The temples endured, just closed. The symbols survived, just repackaged. And some of the same elites who dismissed Egypt as fantasy still study its secrets in private because they know there's power here, real power. Not to control others, but to master the self. And once you master yourself, no system, no doctrine, no authority can control you. The more you remember, the harder it becomes for the illusion to hold. You start seeing patterns where others see coincidence. You start feeling energy where others feel emptiness. You begin to sense that life is not linear, not random, not mechanical, but guided, intelligent, interconnected. And the more you see it, the more it confirms what the ancients already knew. You were never meant to be asleep. It emphasized the enduring power of ancient knowledge and its potential for personal transformation. And maybe that's why you're here. Not by chance, not for entertainment, but because some part of you knows, some part of you has always known that the story you were told about this world was too small, that your purpose could never be reduced to a paycheck or a routine, that your soul is older than your name, and your awakening was always inevitable. They've tried everything to keep you in the dark, but the light doesn't ask permission to rise, and once it breaks through, it reveals everything. It shows the lies you lived under. It shows the systems you thought were sacred. But most importantly, it shows you the real you, the one who never needed saving, just remembering. It's a call to reclaim your authentic self and awaken to your true purpose. You were never meant to worship the temples. You were meant to become one. Every stone, every glyph, every symbol etched into the walls of ancient Egypt was a reflection of what already exists within you. The gods were never separate. The rituals were never foreign. They were reminders, blueprints, a map drawn in myth to lead you back to yourself. The goal was to embody the divine principles and awaken your inner potential. You don't need to cross deserts to find the sacred. You carry the sacred inside, your breath, your silence, your questions. You've spent your life looking outside for answers, for guidance, for meaning. But the ancients didn't build their legacy on blind belief. They built it on direct experience, on the knowing that comes when you stop running from yourself. That's what the path of initiation always was. The slow stripping away of illusion, the death of the false self, the birth of something real, something eternal. You don't need more information, you need remembrance. It's about turning inward and discovering the truth within yourself. Egypt wasn't obsessed with the past. It was obsessed with eternity, the ever-present now, the realm where time bends and the soul expands beyond limits. Their symbols weren't just historical relics, they were energetic keys, and they still work when engaged with the right awareness. The Ankh, the scarab, the eye, they're not decorative, they're functional. They activate something ancient in you. That tingle you feel when you look at them, that's your soul waking up. That's your DNA remembering a language older than words. It's a call to connect with the timeless wisdom encoded in ancient symbols. The pyramids were never about death. They were about light, about energy, about ascension. Every step, every chamber, every frequency was built to shift your state, to initiate you into who you really are. Not a passive consumer, not a lost soul, but a cosmic being with the power to bend reality by aligning with truth. This is why you've been told it's just mythology, because if you remembered that truth, nothing could control you. And this is the moment to remember, not as a thought, but as a choice, a return to walk the path again, not through sand and stone, but through awareness, through intention, through silence. Because silence is where the soul speaks. And when you stop numbing, scrolling, distracting, running, you'll hear it. That voice, that knowing, that spark that says you've always known, you just forgot. It's a reminder of your inherent power and potential to create your own reality. Most people won't walk this path. Not because they can't, but because remembering takes courage. It requires unlearning what made you feel safe. It demands that you trade comfort for truth. But the truth is the only thing that can set you free. And freedom, real freedom, starts when you stop being afraid of who you are beneath the noise. That's what the priests knew. That's what the myths encoded. That's what the rituals prepared you for, to meet yourself. Not the mask, but the infinite. It's a call to embrace authenticity and embark on a journey of self-discovery. If you felt something stirring while listening to this, it's not imagination. It's alignment, the resonance of something deeper than your name or your story. It's the part of you that cannot be defined, labeled, or broken. The part that has walked this path before and chose to walk it again. The part that knows exactly what you are even when the world forgets. This isn't a history lesson, it's a homecoming. It's a recognition of your true nature and your connection to something larger than yourself. You don't need to be told what to believe. You need to remember what your soul already knows. The age of forgetting is ending. The temples are rising again, not in stone, but in the hearts of those who awaken. You are not here by chance, you're here because you're ready, not to learn, but to remember. If you're still listening, it means something inside you is shifting. That the questions you've carried for so long are finally finding their place in a larger story. Don't let that momentum fade. Stay connected, stay curious, keep walking. The journey doesn't end here. So what's the core message here? It's that ancient Egypt wasn't just about pharaohs and pyramids, but about a profound understanding of consciousness, the soul, and our potential for inner transformation. It's about remembering who we truly are, beings capable of incredible spiritual growth and connection to the divine. It's a powerful invitation to look inward and explore the hidden temples within ourselves. What resonates with you the most from all of this? I'd absolutely love to hear your thoughts, questions, or any insights you might have in the comments below. Let's start a conversation and explore these fascinating ideas together. And if you found this video thought-provoking and want to dive deeper into similar topics, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future explorations of ancient wisdom and hidden truths. Let's awaken together.